She married a beggar to escape her ex's abuse, never suspecting that the man in tattered clothes was worth billions. Kira thought she was making a desperate choice when she proposed to Keith, a stranger she barely knew, but her world turned upside down when she discovered the truth about her new husband's identity. As Greg, her ex, plots to destroy her newfound happiness, Kira finds herself caught in a web of corporate espionage, family secrets, and unexpected love. What would you do if you discovered the homeless man you married out of convenience was actually the CEO of one of the most powerful companies in the country? Kira stood at her apartment window, one hand cradling her newborn daughter, the other pressing against the cool glass, as if trying to hold back the world that threatened to crush her. 3 floors below, the same man sat huddled on the bench, across from her building entrance. For the past 2 weeks, she had observed him, always in the same tattered gray coat, always alone, yet somehow maintaining a dignity that belied his circumstances. She had begun to measure her days by his presence, finding strange comfort in the consistency of a stranger when her own life had shattered into unrecognizable fragments. The baby stirred, her tiny face scrunching with hunger. Kira moved to the kitchenette, preparing a bottle with practiced one-handed efficiency. The formula canister was nearly empty, just like her bank account. The stack of medical bills on her counter had grown tall enough to cast shadows across her apartment. Medical terms and red "final notice" stamps bleeding together in her exhausted vision. 3 years with Greg had dissolved in an instant when the pregnancy test showed positive. His words still cut through her memories. "I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility. Claire doesn't make these kinds of demands." The casual cruelty of mentioning her replacement in the same breath as rejecting their child had left Kira speechless, standing in their shared apartment as he packed his designer clothes and walked away without a backward glance. She had believed that would be the end of it. Painful, but clean. She'd been wrong. Greg's absence lasted only until the baby was born, when suddenly he appeared in the hospital corridor, Claire conspicuously absent, talking about his rights as a father and how a child needs proper stability. The thinly veiled thread of custody claims hung between them, his family's financial resources and connections, making the threat all too real. The baby finished her bottle, and Kira gently patted her back, whispering soft reassurances she herself didn't believe. Her maternity leave was coming to an end, with no childcare she could afford. Her parents lived across the country, struggling with their own financial burdens. Friends had slowly drifted away during her pregnancy, uncomfortable with her situation, or simply absorbed in their own lives. "We'll figure something out," she promised her daughter, though the words felt hollow. Her phone buzzed with another text from Greg, demanding to discuss arrangements for visitation. She knew what that meant. More subtle intimidation, more references to his family's lawyer, more reminders of everything she couldn't provide alone. The man on the bench caught her attention again. Despite his circumstances, there was something about him that didn't fit the expected narrative of homelessness. His posture remained erect, his movements deliberate. Once, she had seen him reading what appeared to be a newspaper, folded neatly despite its weathered appearance. Most strikingly, whenever someone approached him, whether to offer charity or more commonly, to demand he move along, he responded with a calm politeness that often left the other person looking more flustered than he. As the baby drifted to sleep, an idea formed in Kira's mind. Absurd at first, then increasingly compelling with each passing hour and each threatening message from Greg. By evening, desperation had crystallized her thoughts into a plan that, while extreme, offered a solution to her most pressing problems. The next morning, Kira dressed with unusual care, selecting clothes that suggested stability rather than the panic that had become her constant companion. She bundled her daughter warmly and descended the apartment stairs, heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would wake the sleeping infant. The man looked up as she approached, and for the first time, she fully registered his eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, alert and observant in a way that momentarily made her falter. Not the vacant or defeated gaze she had expected, but something penetrating and intelligent that made her feel strangely exposed. "Good morning," he said, his voice surprisingly refined. "You live in apartment 3B, 3rd floor, second window from the left." Kira stepped back involuntarily. "You've been watching me?" "I observe my surroundings," he replied simply. "You watch me too, usually at 8 a.m. when you have your coffee, again around noon, and in the evening before the streetlights come on. That's disconcerting." A slight smile touched his lips. "Observation isn't intrusion. I've made no approach until now, when you've chosen to speak to me." His articulation confirmed what she had suspected. This man's circumstances didn't align with his demeanor or intelligence. Something had brought him to this bench, but it wasn't lack of education or capability. Taking a deep breath, Kira sat beside him, adjusting the baby carrier on her lap. "I have a proposition for you, an unusual one." "The most interesting propositions often are," he replied, his attention focused entirely on her now. "I need a husband," she stated bluntly. "A legal one, on paper. My ex is threatening to take my daughter, and I can't afford to fight him in court. A married woman with a stable home life has a better chance of maintaining custody." If she expected shock or confusion, she was disappointed. Keith, as he introduced himself moments later, simply nodded thoughtfully. "And what would I receive in this arrangement?" he asked, practical rather than offended. "Shelter, food, basic necessities. I don't have much, but I have an apartment with heat and running water. It would be temporary, just until I can establish financial security and prove I can provide stability for my daughter." Keith studied her with those perceptive eyes, and Kira felt the absurdity of her proposal crash over her. She was about to apologize, to retreat to her apartment, and find another solution, when he spoke. "I accept your terms." The simplicity of his response momentarily robbed her of speech. "You, just like that? You don't need time to consider?" "What is there to consider? You need protection. I need shelter. A mutually beneficial arrangement." He extended his hand formally. "Keith, no surname needed for now." 3 days later, they stood in the sterile surroundings of the county courthouse, Keith wearing the only clean clothes Kira could find that fit him. A simple button-down shirt and slacks left behind by Greg in his hasty departure. The irony wasn't lost on her. The clothes of the man threatening her freedom now dressed the man she hoped would help secure it. The ceremony, if it could be called that, lasted less than 5 minutes. No flowers, no music, no witnesses, except the bored courthouse staff who had seen countless such arrangements, though perhaps few as unusual as this. As they signed the marriage certificate, Kira noticed Keith's handwriting, elegant and assured, another detail that didn't align with his apparent circumstances. "Mrs. Kira," Keith paused, looking at their newly signed certificate. "That's the first time I've seen your full name, and I still don't know yours," she replied, the reality of what she'd done beginning to sink in as the clerk filed their paperwork. "I just married a man whose last name I don't know." Something like amusement flickered in Keith's eyes. "Would knowing it have changed your decision?" "Probably not," she admitted, adjusting her sleeping daughter in her arms. Desperation doesn't leave much room for background checks. As they left the courthouse, Kira felt strangely lighter, despite the weight of what they'd done. The arrangement was clear, the boundaries defined. This was business, not romance, a practical solution to an impossible situation. She had a husband on paper. He had shelter. Simple. As they stepped into her apartment, Kira expected gratitude, perhaps even a hint of awe, from a man who had been sleeping on a bench. Instead, Keith stood respectfully at the threshold, asking permission before touching anything, the first sign that the simple bargain she'd struck might conceal complications she never anticipated. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the coat rack. His voice carried a certain refinement that seemed jarringly out of place with his worn appearance. Kira nodded, watching as he removed his tattered coat with the careful movements of someone accustomed to much finer garments. "I've prepared the sofa for you," she said, gesturing to the living room where she'd placed a pillow and blanket. "The bathroom is down the hall if you want to clean up." Keith thanked her with unexpected eloquence, his vocabulary and sentence structure betraying an education that didn't align with his circumstances. When he emerged from the bathroom 30 minutes later, Kira nearly dropped the mug she was holding. His hair, now washed and combed, revealed natural highlights she hadn't noticed before. His face, scrubbed clean, showed features that were striking in their symmetry. Most surprising was the scent, not of soap from her bathroom, but something expensive and subtle that she couldn't identify. The incongruities multiplied in the days that followed. Keith would vanish each morning before Kira awoke, leaving the apartment in perfect order. He'd return in the late afternoon with small amounts of cash, always in crisp bills, offering a portion for household expenses, without explanation of how he'd earned it. His vague mentions of odd jobs didn't explain the precision with which he counted money, or the way his eyes assessed the value of objects with uncanny accuracy. On the third night, Kira woke to the sound of Keith's voice, low, authoritative, speaking in hushed tones on a phone she didn't know he possessed. She caught fragments that made little sense. Position unchanged. Transfer the remainder to the Cayman account. Surveillance continues as scheduled. When she questioned him the next morning, his explanation about checking in with an old friend was delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kitchen became another realm of revelation. Kira had offered to cook dinner as a simple gesture. Nothing fancy, just pasta with olive oil and garlic. She was stirring the sauce when Keith appeared at her elbow, his expression pained. "The olive oil," he said gently, "should be added only after removing the pan from heat to preserve its flavor profile." His hand moved toward the stove before stopping midair, waiting for permission. When she nodded, he adjusted the temperature with the practiced ease of someone who had spent significant time in professional kitchens. "Where did you learn to cook?" Kira asked, watching him transform her simple meal into something that smelled remarkable. "Here and there," he replied, the vague answer becoming his standard response to any question about his past. Yet there was nothing vague about his knowledge of reduction techniques or the precise moment when herbs should be added to a sauce. His reading habits proved equally mystifying. Kira found him absorbed in the financial section of newspapers she hadn't purchased, making notations in the margins with a precision that suggested years of market analysis. When she glanced at his notes, the cramped handwriting revealed complex calculations and abbreviations that meant nothing to her, but clearly formed part of a sophisticated system. "Just keeping track of potential opportunities," he explained. When he caught her looking, the statement might have made sense for someone searching for employment, but the columns Keith focused on covered international currency fluctuations and emerging market indicators, hardly relevant to day labor positions. The true measure of Keith's complexity came unexpectedly one afternoon, when Greg arrived unannounced, pushing past Kira into the apartment with the entitled confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. He stopped short at the sight of Keith, who had been reading on the sofa. "Who the hell are you?" Greg demanded. Keith rose slowly, his posture transforming before Kira's eyes. Gone was the deferential manner he typically displayed in her presence. In its place stood someone else entirely, a man whose measured stillness suggested controlled power rather than submission. "I'm Kira's husband," Keith replied, his voice carrying an authority that made Greg take an instinctive step backward. "And you're trespassing in our home." The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes. Greg, clearly unprepared for Keith's commanding presence, retreated with muttered threats about checking into things. As the door closed behind him, Keith's posture relaxed. But something had fundamentally changed. Kira had glimpsed another person behind the mask of the humble beggar, someone accustomed to being obeyed. The discovery came by accident. Kira had been gathering Keith's few belongings to make space in a drawer for him when her hand brushed against something solid, wrapped in a worn handkerchief. The object felt substantial, with the unmistakable weight of quality. Curiosity overrode her respect for his privacy. As she unwrapped the cloth, light caught on polished platinum and the distinctive logo of a watchmaker whose pieces she'd only seen in magazine advertisements. The timepiece lay heavy in her palm, its intricate mechanisms visible through the crystal face. Even with her limited knowledge of luxury goods, Kira recognized that she was holding something worth more than her annual salary. The contrast between this exquisite object and Keith's apparent circumstances was so jarring that she nearly missed the engraving on the back, a series of initials that meant nothing to her, but further confirmed that the watch belonged to someone of significant means. When Keith returned that evening, she confronted him with the discovery, watching his face for any reaction. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or concern, before his features settled into a carefully neutral expression. "It's a reminder," he said, simply, taking the watch and returning it to its hiding place with movements that suggested both familiarity and reverence. "Of a life I once had. A life where you could afford watches worth tens of thousands of dollars?" Kira pressed, her mind racing with possibilities. "Who are you really, Keith?" His smile contained a sadness that seemed genuine. "Someone trying to find answers, just like you." The response was both honest-sounding and completely insufficient, revealing nothing while acknowledging that there was, indeed, something to reveal. That night, as Keith slept on the sofa, Kira lay awake, staring at her ceiling. She had married a stranger for practical reasons, expecting simplicity and clarity in their arrangement. Instead, she found herself living with a walking contradiction, a man whose outward appearance of poverty concealed refinement, education, and resources that made no logical sense. The watch was merely the physical evidence of what she had been observing for days. Keith's unusual phone calls, his unexplained income, his knowledge of subjects that required years of specialized education, his ability to intimidate someone like Greg with mere presence. None of it aligned with the story of a simple homeless man accepting charity in exchange for marriage. The watch hidden in Keith's belongings wasn't the only valuable thing being concealed. As Kira stepped back into her corporate world after maternity leave, she discovered that power often operates from the shadows, and sometimes your most dangerous enemies and most powerful allies are hiding in plain sight. The office felt different. Kira noticed it immediately as she walked through the familiar glass doors, baby photos ready on her phone, and determination set in her jaw. The smiles seemed strained. Conversations halted when she approached, and her desk had been relocated to a corner with poor lighting and no visibility. Her nameplate, once prominently displayed, now lay inside her drawer, as if someone had decided she wouldn't be staying long. "Welcome back," her supervisor said, with a tightness that suggested the opposite sentiment. "We've reassigned some of your accounts during your absence. You understand, of course." By lunchtime, Kira understood perfectly. Greg had spent her maternity leave weaving a web of whispers. The rumors reached her through Melanie, the only colleague who still made eye contact. "He's been telling everyone you only got your position because you were sleeping with Director Larson," Melanie whispered over salads. "And now that you've had a baby, well, he's implying your focus will be compromised." Kira gripped her fork tightly. "That's ridiculous. I've consistently outperformed every quarterly target for 3 years." "I know that," Melanie said, glancing around. "But Greg's been in everyone's ear, including clients, and he's been promoted to senior account manager while you were gone." The sabotage escalated with surgical precision. 3 days before her presentation to Westlake Industries, a client she'd cultivated for years, Kira arrived early to finalize her proposal, only to find every file deleted from both her computer and the backup server. The IT department's investigation concluded user error, pointing to logs showing Kira had apparently deleted the files herself. "This is impossible," she protested, staring at the timestamp of deletions that occurred during her son's pediatrician appointment. "I wasn't even in the building." Her supervisor's expression remained unmoved. "Your badge was scanned at entry during that time." The company's CEO, a man Kira had seen only in quarterly presentations, requested her presence the following morning. The executive boardroom felt cavernous, with only 4 people present: the CEO, the head of security, the legal director, and Kira herself. "Ms. Chen, we have reason to believe proprietary information has been leaked to Westlake's competitors," the CEO stated flatly. "The data breach has been traced to your login credentials." Kira felt the floor tilt beneath her. "That's impossible. I would never—" "We have digital evidence," the security director interrupted, sliding a folder across the polished table. "Your termination papers are prepared. We simply need to determine whether this warrants legal action." As Kira struggled to comprehend how thoroughly her professional life was unraveling, the legal director's phone chimed. He looked down, frowned, and requested a moment to check his email. The room fell into uncomfortable silence as he read, his expression shifting from annoyance to surprise. "Sir," he said finally to the CEO, "I believe you should see this immediately." The email contained security footage from 3 separate cameras, showing someone using Kira's computer while she was absent. The figure wore a maintenance uniform, but moved with familiar confidence through the office. When he briefly looked up, the camera captured a clear image of Greg's face as he inserted a flash drive into Kira's computer. Additional footage showed Greg entering the building using Kira's badge during her documented doctor appointment. Attached were server logs, revealing that the proprietary information had been accessed through Greg's home IP address on multiple occasions. "It appears we owe you an apology, Ms. Chen," the CEO said, after a lengthy review, "and we have another matter to address immediately." By afternoon, security was escorting Greg from the building. His face flushed crimson when he spotted Kira watching from the conference room. The whispers throughout the office now carried a different tone, one of shock and reassessment. "We value loyalty and integrity," the CEO told Kira privately afterward. "Your department has clearly become problematic. I'd like to offer you a position in corporate strategy, reporting directly to the executive team. It comes with a considerable salary increase and flexible hours for your new family situation." The transformation was dizzying. By week's end, Kira had a new office with windows overlooking the city, a team that regarded her with respect rather than suspicion, and a direct line to leadership previously inaccessible to someone at her former level. That evening she recounted the week's events to Keith, who listened intently while preparing dinner. His questions seemed oddly specific. "This security footage?" he asked while perfectly julienning vegetables. "Did they mention who discovered it or submitted it to the legal team?" "The email was anonymous," Kira replied. "The legal director said it came through an encrypted channel they couldn't trace." Keith nodded, continuing his methodical food preparation. "And your new department? You mentioned it reports to the parent company?" "Directly to Coffee Corporation's executive leadership," Kira confirmed, watching him carefully. "It's strange. People in my position don't typically have that kind of visibility." Something about Keith's composed reaction sparked a connection in Kira's mind. His questions weren't just conversational. They were pointed, almost as if confirming outcomes rather than learning new information. "Keith," she said slowly, "how much do you know about what happened at my workplace?" He met her gaze steadily. "I know that injustice rarely corrects itself without intervention." "Did you have something to do with this?" Kira pressed. Keith's smile was slight, but unmistakable. "Let's just say I understand how evidence can sometimes get lost, or found, at precisely the right moment." The implications were staggering. Her supposedly homeless husband possessed the resources and connections to not only access corporate security systems, but to influence executive decisions at one of the city's largest companies. The man who carefully asked permission to use her bathroom had somehow orchestrated Greg's professional downfall and her unexpected promotion. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked, struggling to reconcile the man before her with these actions. Keith's expression softened momentarily. "People like Greg believe power comes from taking what others have built. They're wrong. True power is protecting what matters without anyone realizing you've acted at all." In the days that followed, Kira noticed subtle changes in how Keith engaged with her work discussions. He never directly admitted involvement, but his questions always seemed to anticipate developments before they occurred. When she mentioned upcoming challenges, they would mysteriously resolve themselves before reaching crisis point. The Keith who slept on her sofa and the unseen force rearranging corporate obstacles were the same person, a man operating in 2 entirely different worlds simultaneously. Like the platinum watch, hidden among threadbare possessions, his influence was carefully concealed but unmistakably valuable. Beneath the quiet contentment of their new arrangement, a much larger story was unfolding in the business world. While Kira adjusted to her surprising promotion, morning headlines across financial networks buzzed with speculation about one of the most puzzling corporate mysteries of the decade. 2 years since the disappearance of Keith Coffee, second heir to the Coffee Corporation fortune, investors remain concerned about leadership stability, announced the business anchor on the morning news. Kira barely registered the report until she noticed her husband's posture stiffen. Keith, who normally maintained a deliberately relaxed demeanor, suddenly sat upright, his attention laser-focused on the television. His knuckles whitened around his coffee mug as the report continued. Following the tragic death of matriarch Eliza Coffey 2 years ago, her younger son Keith vanished from public life without explanation. The corporation has announced yet another restructuring, with cousin Reuben Coffey consolidating power as acting CEO. Sources inside the company suggest the board has all but given up on the prodigal son's return. When the anchor mentioned Reuben's name, something dark flashed across Keith's features. A micro-expression of pure hatred that disappeared so quickly, Kira almost believed she'd imagined it. But the tension remained in his shoulders long after the segment ended. "Did you know them? The Coffey family?" Kira asked casually, testing her growing suspicion. Keith's response came too quickly. "Everyone knows of them. Biggest coffee importers in the hemisphere." He changed the subject with practiced ease, but the moment stayed with Kira throughout her commute. At her new office, Kira discovered the reason for her department's creation. "These transactions don't add up," her manager explained, sliding a folder across the desk. "Since the younger Coffey heir disappeared, we've identified potentially suspicious movement of funds. Your team will audit discrepancies discreetly." The weight of the assignment wasn't lost on Kira. These weren't minor bookkeeping errors, but patterns suggesting systematic embezzlement reaching into millions. The timing, all within the 2 years since Keith Coffey's disappearance, created an uncomfortable correlation that the company clearly wanted investigated without public scrutiny. "You'll report findings directly to executive leadership," her manager added. "This information doesn't leave this floor." As Kira familiarized herself with the company's financial structure, she noticed Greg's name appearing with increasing frequency in interdepartmental memos. Despite his mediocre performance record, he'd received 2 rapid promotions since her return from maternity leave. More puzzling were the calendar entries showing regular lunch meetings between Greg and someone identified only as RC. Later that week, Kira spotted Greg in the executive wing elevator, laughing comfortably with a tall, impeccably dressed man she recognized immediately from news coverage, Reuben Coffey himself. The casual way Reuben clapped Greg's shoulder suggested an established relationship, one that explained Greg's mysterious career advancement, despite his documented incompetence. That evening, a business magazine caught Kira's eye in the checkout line, its cover featuring the Coffey dynasty's remaining leadership. She purchased it, telling herself it was research for her audit project. At home, she studied the family photo spread, while Keith was in the shower. The resemblance wasn't immediate. The Keith Coffey in these photographs appeared polished, confident, and surrounded by luxury. Yet something about the eyes, the jaw structure, beneath the corporate veneer and proper haircut, was a face startlingly similar to her husband's. When Keith emerged from the bathroom, Kira casually flipped the magazine open to the Coffey family profile. "This audit project has me researching this family. Quite the dynasty." His reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. A momentary freeze before he forced casualness. "Interesting," he commented, glancing at the article while carefully controlling his expression. But when Reuben's smiling face appeared in a separate photo, Keith's jaw tightened visibly. Over the following weeks, Kira noticed a pattern. Whenever news broadcasts mentioned the Coffey Corporation, Keith would stop whatever he was doing, his attention completely captured. During her late-night work sessions reviewing suspicious transactions, she sometimes caught him watching over her shoulder, his gaze lingering on particular account numbers before he pretended disinterest. The truth hovered just beyond her grasp until a rainy Saturday afternoon. While Keith was out on one of his mysterious errands, the ancient radiator in their apartment malfunctioned, leaking water that threatened the few possessions stacked beside Keith's makeshift bed on the sofa. As Kira hurriedly moved his things to safety, a worn manila envelope slipped from between his folded clothes, spilling its contents across the floor. Newspaper clippings, dozens of them, all about the same event. "Coffey, Corp matriarchs, suicide shocks business world," read one headline. "Eliza Coffey, found dead in family estate," announced another. Each article had been meticulously annotated with cramped handwriting in the margins, inconsistent with her character. No previous signs of depression, access to her quarters. The notes formed a methodical deconstruction of the official suicide ruling. Most revealing was a folded article about toxicology findings, with Inconclusive, underlined 3 times, and retest denied why, scrawled in the margin. In the corner, Keith had written what appeared to be a list of suspects, with Ruben's name circled repeatedly. The bathroom door suddenly clicked open. Keith stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the scattered clippings. For the first time since they'd met, he appeared genuinely caught off guard. "You're him, aren't you?" Kira whispered, holding up a clipping with a grainy photo of Keith Coffey at his mother's funeral. "You're not just someone who knew them, you're Keith Coffey." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the practiced casualness she'd grown accustomed to. "My mother didn't kill herself," he said simply. The pieces suddenly aligned with devastating clarity. The watch, with its engraved initials, the financial expertise, the mysterious phone calls, the perfect timing of her workplace salvation. "You're investigating her death," Kira realized aloud. "From the shadows, where no one would recognize you." Keith nodded slowly. "Ruben orchestrated everything. Her death, my exile, the false narratives. I needed to disappear completely to find the truth. And our marriage?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications. "Was that part of your cover story?" His expression softened slightly. "Initially, yes. A beggar with a wife and family draws less scrutiny than a solitary man who appears from nowhere. People see what they expect to see. A desperate arrangement, a convenient solution for us both." Kira felt a complex wave of emotions. Betrayal at having been used, yet understanding of the desperate measures demanded by such circumstances. She thought of her own desperation when she'd proposed to him, how she'd used him just as strategically. "You could have chosen anyone," she said finally. "Why me?" Keith's answer revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "Because you were already in danger. When I saw how Greg was harassing you, threatening to take your child, I recognized Ruben's methods. He was using Greg to manipulate you because of your new position auditing corporate finances, the very records that contain evidence of his crimes." As Keith's revelation settled in the room, a notification chimed on Kira's phone. An invitation to present her financial findings directly to the Coffey Corporation Board of Directors. The very same board where Keith Coffey's empty chair had remained a subject of speculation for 2 years. She looked up from her phone to find Keith watching her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something like panic flash across his features. "Good news, Kati?" he asked, his voice carefully modulated. Kira nodded slowly. "They want me to present my audit findings to the board next Friday." She watched his reaction carefully, noticing how his shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "I suppose I'll finally get to see the infamous boardroom where all the major Coffey Corporation decisions happen." Keith's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Congratulations. You deserve the recognition." He glanced at his watch. Not the platinum one she'd discovered, but the cheap digital timepiece he wore as part of his disguise. "I should get going. I have a job interview across town." The dance of deception between them continued, but the music was becoming increasingly discordant. Later that afternoon, Kira received another surprise. A call from Ruben Coffey himself, requesting to stop by her apartment to discuss some aspects of the presentation. She texted Keith immediately. Within minutes he called. "I'm so sorry," he said, sounding genuinely distressed. "My sister's been in an accident. Nothing life-threatening, but I need to head to the hospital right away." The lie hung between them. Though Kira had no way to prove it was untrue, she only knew Keith had never mentioned having a sister before. When Ruben arrived at her door that evening, Kira was struck by the family resemblance. His eyes held the same intelligent spark as Keith's, though lacking the warmth. He moved with the same confident grace, though his carried an undertone of entitlement rather than Keith's careful humility. "Ms. Wallace," he said, extending his hand. "Or should I say, Mrs.?" He paused, seemingly confused about her married name. "I kept my last name," Kira supplied quickly, wondering if this was some kind of test. "Please, come in." As they reviewed her findings, Ruben's questions became increasingly pointed, focusing on specific transactions she'd flagged, the very same ones that contained annotations in Keith's handwriting in her work files at home. He leaned forward, his cologne expensive and cloying. "I understand you've experienced some personal difficulties recently. A new baby, a hasty marriage. I just want to assure you that the coffee corporation values loyalty above all else." The threat beneath his words was barely concealed. Before Reuben left, he casually mentioned the upcoming charity gala. "The entire board will be there, of course. Your husband should attend as well. Networking is so valuable in this industry." The following morning, a delivery arrived at their apartment, a handcrafted wooden crib with a mobile of stars and planets, matching furniture, and designer baby clothes, all from the most exclusive boutique in the city. The delivery person shrugged when Kira asked who had sent them. "Anonymous gift. Happens all the time with our wealthy clients." Keith's response when he saw the items was oddly muted. "Perhaps someone from your office? A collective gift? No one at my level could afford this," Kira said, running her hand over the crib's smooth finish. "This set costs more than I make in 3 months." His nighttime absences became more frequent, always with vague explanations about job prospects or meeting potential contacts. Kira began tracking Coffee Corporation stock movements and board announcements, noting a disturbing pattern. Major company decisions often came the morning after Keith's disappearances. Her department received increased funding following one such night. A troublesome manager was transferred after another. The carefully constructed wall between Keith's 2 lives was developing cracks. Kira found herself constantly checking his few possessions when he was out, searching for more clues. In his wallet, tucked behind a faded photo, she discovered a keycard with no identifying marks, but the color and size matched the executive access card she'd seen at coffee headquarters. Her suspicion turned to certainty when Lisa from IT casually mentioned a security breach. Strangest thing, someone accessed the executive floor through the private elevator last night. Security camera caught him, but when they went to investigate, he was gone. "Did they see who it was?" Kira asked, trying to sound merely curious. "Just a glimpse. Tall man, baseball cap pulled low. The weird thing is, he used a valid keycard. Must have been an executive who didn't want to be seen." That night, Keith claimed he couldn't attend the charity gala with her. "I've picked up a night shift at a warehouse," he explained. "We need the extra money." The lie was so transparent now that Kira almost laughed. They both knew her new salary more than covered their modest expenses. "That's too bad," she said, watching his face carefully. "Reuben mentioned the entire board would be there." Something flickered behind his eyes. "Did he? Well, I'm sure you'll represent us beautifully." The gala was held at the Coffee Corporation's main headquarters, in a ballroom Kira had never seen before. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd of elegantly dressed executives and their partners. Champagne flowed freely as Reuben took the stage to welcome everyone. "We gather tonight to celebrate the Coffee Foundation's charitable work," he announced, "and to look forward to a prosperous future." His eyes scanned the crowd, pausing momentarily on Kira. "Unfortunately, my cousin remains absent, but the coffee legacy continues strong nonetheless." As Reuben spoke, Kira noticed a small commotion near one of the side entrances. Security personnel were speaking urgently into their earpieces. A moment later, executives began gravitating toward a corner of the room that Kira couldn't see clearly from her position. She made her way through the crowd, curiosity overcoming caution. The circle parted briefly, and Kira caught a glimpse of a man surrounded by board members. He moved with a familiar grace, his hand gestures reminiscent of someone she knew intimately. The tailored suit couldn't disguise the way he held himself, the slight tilt of his head as he listened. As if sensing her gaze, the man turned slightly. The profile was unmistakable. The straight nose, the defined jawline that she had traced with her fingers in their quiet moments at home. Keith. But not her Keith. This was Keith Coffee, heir to the empire, commanding respect with every gesture. The room seemed to spin around her. Every interaction, every strange behavior, every unexplained absence suddenly aligned into a coherent picture. The refined manners, the financial expertise, the watch, the mysterious phone calls, they weren't anomalies in a beggar's life. They were glimpses of his true identity bleeding through the disguise. Greg appeared at her elbow, his face flushed with drink and malice. "So, the truth comes out," he hissed. "Your homeless husband is quite the catch after all. Did you know all along? Were you both laughing at me behind my back?" "What are you talking about?" Kira asked, stalling for time, her mind racing. Keith Coffey, the prodigal son returns. Greg's smile was ugly. I've been doing some digging. Your husband disappeared right after his mother's death. Everyone thought he'd had a breakdown, but he's been playing some kind of game, and you're part of it. Before she could respond, Reuben approached, his expression carefully neutral. Kira, I see you've noticed our surprise guest. Perhaps you'd like an introduction to Mr. Coffey. The cruel amusement in his eyes told her that Reuben knew exactly who she was married to and was enjoying watching the charade collapse. As Reuben guided her toward the gathering, Keith looked up, and their eyes met across the room. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and she saw genuine fear in his expression. In that instant, Kira understood that Keith's deception wasn't merely about hiding his identity, it was about survival. Whatever game he was playing with Reuben, the stakes were clearly life and death. And now, she had become a liability in a battle she didn't fully understand. What if the most shocking secret between Kira and Keith wasn't his hidden identity, but a connection that existed long before their arranged marriage? While searching through her drawer for her passport before the upcoming board meeting, Kira's fingers brushed against something unexpected, a glossy photograph she'd completely forgotten about. Kira pulled out the faded photograph, showing herself in an elegant black dress at the Coffee Corporation's annual charity gala 2 years ago. She barely remembered attending the event. It had been one of those rare nights when Greg had insisted she accompany him to make connections. The gala had been held at the Coffey Estate, a sprawling mansion that had appeared in architectural magazines worldwide. As she studied the image, something caught her eye in the background, a familiar silhouette engaged in conversation with an older woman. The profile was unmistakable. That's impossible, Kira whispered, her hand trembling. The man in the background was Keith, not the disheveled man she'd met outside her apartment, but Keith Coffey in an impeccably tailored suit, his hair neatly styled, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with the late Eliza Coffey. Memories began flooding back, memories she'd suppressed after that night. Greg had abandoned her shortly after they arrived, chasing the attention of a young heiress. Devastated and humiliated, Kira had escaped to the mansion's gardens, where she'd encountered a stranger sitting alone on a stone bench. They'd talked for hours, under the moonlight, about everything and nothing: philosophy, art, their hopes for the future. In her pain, she'd found unexpected comfort with this kind, mysterious man who listened so intently to her troubles. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The timing of that night, that singular, impulsive night of connection, aligned perfectly with her pregnancy. She had always assumed Greg was her child's father, without questioning it, despite his immediate rejection of responsibility. But now, staring at the photograph with dawning horror and wonder, the math suddenly made perfect sense. A chill ran through her as she recalled how Keith had been singing an obscure French lullaby to the baby last week, the same melody her grandmother had sung to her as a child, which she sometimes hummed absent-mindedly. At the time, she'd been surprised, but assumed it was a coincidence. Then, there was his fascination with the baby's tiny fingers, which he claimed were artistic, just like her mother's. The way he gently traced the shape of her daughter's eyes and commented on how they would likely turn the exact shade of amber as his own. But it was the birthmark that now seemed the most damning evidence of all. Last night, during the baby's bath, Kira had noticed Keith staring at the small crescent-shaped mark on the baby's shoulder. When she caught him looking, he'd quickly averted his eyes, mumbling something about getting fresh towels. The same distinctive mark was visible on Keith's shoulder when he changed shirts, a detail she'd noticed but never connected until this moment. How long have you known? Keith's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he stared at the photograph in her hands. There was no point in pretense now. I just figured it out, Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night at the gala, it was you. Keith moved into the room slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. I didn't make the connection at first either. You looked different that night. More carefree, your hair was longer, and I wasn't exactly myself either. Were you ever going to tell me? Anger flashed through her confusion. You knew, didn't you? You've known all along that she's yours. Keith's shoulders slumped as he sank into the chair across from her. I suspected, but I wasn't certain until recently. I ordered a DNA test 3 weeks ago. The results came back yesterday. A DNA test? Without my permission? Kira's voice rose. I took a strand of her hair and compared it with mine, Keith admitted. I had to know, Kira. I've been wondering since the first day I saw her. So all of this, our arrangement, you agreeing to marry me, was it because you knew she was yours? Keith's expression darkened. Number. When I first saw you again, heavily pregnant and clearly in distress, I had no idea if the child was mine. Our night together had been months before, but I recognized you. And when I saw how Greg was treating you, he paused, collecting himself. I wanted to help. Regardless, Kira tried to process this information, her mind racing. But after we married, you must have figured out the timing. Yes, Keith admitted. The more time I spent with both of you, the more I began to wonder. She has my mother's expressions sometimes, the way she furrows her brow when she's concentrating, and the birthmark. It's hereditary in the Coffey family. Why didn't you say anything? Kira demanded, tears forming in her eyes. Because I was afraid, Keith said simply. Afraid you'd think I manipulated this whole situation. Afraid you'd leave once you knew my true identity. And then, as time passed, and I grew to care for both of you more than I expected, I became terrified of losing the family I never knew I wanted. Kira stared at him, seeing not the billionaire CEO or the homeless man she'd married, but something in between, a man who had made choices both selfish and selfless, just as she had. After that night at the gala, Keith continued, his voice softer now, I looked for you, but all I knew was your first name and that you worked in finance. You disappeared into the crowd, and by the time I'd finished handling an urgent matter with my mother, you were gone. And then, months later, I saw you outside your apartment building, Keith confirmed. At first, I wasn't sure it was you, but then I heard Greg threatening you, saw how far along you were in your pregnancy, and something just clicked. I decided to stay nearby, to make sure you were all right. I never planned to approach you. I was going to watch from a distance, maybe find a way to help anonymously, until I approached you with my desperate proposal, Kira finished, understanding dawning. Keith nodded. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was helping someone in need, who happened to be someone I'd met before. But part of me wondered if there was something more at work. So our marriage, Kira said carefully, was it ever really just convenience for you? Or was it always about the baby? It started as one thing and became another, Keith admitted. At first, it was about protecting you both, whether she was mine or not. Then, as I grew to know you, really know you, it became about more than obligation or curiosity. It became about belonging somewhere, with someone, after years of isolation. Kira looked down at the photograph again, tracing the outline of their silhouettes. We've been living a lie, built on another lie. You weren't just a homeless man, and I wasn't just a desperate single mother. We were already connected. Does that make what we've built any less real? Keith asked quietly. As Keith's question hung in the air, Kira's hand closed around the photograph in her pocket. The evidence she'd gathered felt like it was burning through her fingertips. The keycard, the gala photo, the birthmark connection, all of it pointing to one undeniable truth. She'd rehearsed this confrontation a dozen times in her mind, planning exactly how she would force Keith to admit his deception. But the universe had other plans. The apartment door burst open with a crash. There stood Keith, not as the composed man she'd married, but as someone barely holding himself upright. Blood seeped through his designer shirt that he'd poorly concealed beneath his tattered coat. His phone already dialing someone listed only as Protocol 7. How many more layers of deception were there to this man she thought she knew? Don't call an ambulance, Keith managed, collapsing onto the sofa while pressing his hand against a deep gash across his ribcage. They're watching the hospitals. Kira rushed to his side, instinct overriding her anger. Who did this to you? She demanded, grabbing a clean towel and pressing it against the wound. Keith's eyes, usually so guarded, now held raw pain. Reuben's men. They followed me from the financial district. He winced, checking his phone. My doctor will be here in 10 minutes. They think they've silenced me, but they've only confirmed what I've been investigating. The practiced speech Kira had prepared evaporated. This isn't just about corporate rivalry, is it? She whispered, watching blood seep through the expensive fabric of his shirt. A shirt no beggar could afford. No, Keith admitted, His breathing labored. It never was. Within minutes, a discreet knock at the door announced the arrival of a distinguished older man carrying a medical bag worth more than most of the furniture in their apartment. He didn't ask questions, merely nodded respectfully. "Mr. Coffee," he acknowledged quietly before turning his attention to the wound. "Mr. Coffee," Kira repeated, the final confirmation washing over her like ice water. So it's true. The doctor worked efficiently, cleaning and suturing the wound with practiced hands. The blade missed anything vital, but you've lost considerable blood. You need rest, sir. He administered what appeared to be a specialized injection. This should prevent infection. I'll check on you tomorrow. He turned to Kira. He'll need monitoring tonight. Call this number if his temperature rises. He handed her a card embossed with only a phone number. No name, no medical practice listed. After the doctor left, silence filled the apartment. Keith sat propped up on their worn sofa, his expensive watch now plainly visible on his wrist, no longer hidden beneath frayed sleeves. "When were you going to tell me?" Kira finally asked, gathering everything she'd discovered and placing it before him. The keycard, newspaper clippings about the coffee empire, surveillance photos from the gala. "Or was I just another pawn in whatever game you're playing, Keith Coffee?" "I never intended to drag you into this," Keith said, his voice stronger now. "The marriage was meant to be simple, mutual protection. You from Greg, me from public scrutiny. And our child? Was that part of your calculation too?" Kira's voice broke slightly. Keith shook his head, a flash of genuine emotion crossing his face. "Finding you again, discovering you were carrying my child, that was never part of the plan. But it became my reason to finish what I started." "Which is what exactly? What's worth living this double life? Worth lying to me?" Keith's eyes darkened. "Justice for my mother." He shifted, wincing slightly as he reached for the stack of clippings. 2 years ago, Ruben orchestrated what appeared to be my mother's suicide. I found inconsistencies in toxicology reports, witness statements that were altered. The coffee corporation has interests in everything from pharmaceuticals to security firms. The perfect resources for a planned murder disguised as suicide. "So you disappeared to investigate from the shadows," Kira said, pieces finally connecting. "The moment I questioned the official story, strange accidents started happening around me. My car's brakes failed on a mountain road. A gas leak in my apartment while I was sleeping. I realized I couldn't investigate as Keith Coffee. I needed to vanish, become invisible." 3 sharp knocks at the door interrupted them. Keith nodded slightly. "That's my security team." Before Kira could protest, 4 individuals entered their modest apartment, each carrying equipment that transformed their living room into something resembling a military command center within minutes. Laptops, communication devices, and what appeared to be weapons discreetly packed in unmarked cases filled every available surface. "Sir, Ruben's men are regrouping. They've realized you escaped," a stern woman in a tailored suit reported. "We've secured the building perimeter, but this location is compromised." "How long have they been watching?" Kira asked, the implications of their danger sinking in. "Since you presented your preliminary audit findings," Keith answered. "Your work exposed financial discrepancies that threatened to unravel Ruben's entire operation. That's why he visited, to assess how much you knew." Kira stared at him. "You manipulated my career path. My promotion, the audit assignment, that was all you?" Keith met her gaze steadily. "I recognized your financial brilliance that first night at the gala. Later, when I realized who you were, I saw an opportunity. Your skills made you the perfect person to uncover what I couldn't access directly. But I never fabricated your success, Kira. I merely cleared obstacles Ruben had placed to keep talented people like you from discovering his crimes." Kira paced the small apartment, processing everything. "So, our entire relationship, our marriage, it was strategic, a convenience. It began that way," Keith admitted, "but nothing about my feelings for you or our child has been strategic. That's why I've been trying to keep you separate from this investigation." One of the security team interrupted. "Sir, we need to move you both to the safe house immediately." Keith nodded, then looked at Kira. "I understand if you want no part of this. My team can set you and our child up somewhere safe, far from coffee business and Ruben's reach. You don't have to stay with me." The choice crystallized before Kira with sudden clarity. She could walk away from this dangerous game with financial security, but without the man who had become, against all odds, someone she cared deeply about. Or she could stand beside him, facing whatever came next. "Do you have enough evidence against Reuben yet?" she asked, instead of answering his question directly. Keith looked surprised. "Almost. We're missing the financial trail that connects him directly to my mother's murder." "The Singapore accounts," Kira said suddenly. "In my audit, I found transfers to offshore accounts in Singapore 2 days before your mother's death. The authorization came through unusual channels. I flagged it, but couldn't trace the origin." For the first time since she'd known him, Keith seemed genuinely astonished. "You found what my investigators have been searching for over a year. I'm not just the mother of your child, or a convenient cover," Kira said firmly. "I'm a financial analyst who can follow money trails better than most. I want in, not as your wife of convenience, but as your partner." The security team exchanged glances as Keith and Kira stared at each other, a new understanding forming between them. "We leave in 5 minutes, Keith finally said. "Pack only essentials." As Kira quickly gathered their belongings and her research files, she felt a strange sense of liberation. The deception that had defined their relationship was stripped away, leaving something raw, but potentially stronger, in its place. Watching Keith issue directions to his team with natural authority, she saw him fully for the first time. Not the beggar she'd married, nor the billionaire heir, but a man fighting for justice while protecting those he loved. "Do you have enough evidence against Reuben yet?" she asked, instead of answering his question directly. Keith looked surprised. "Almost. We're missing the financial trail that connects him directly to my mother's murder." "The Singapore accounts," Kira said suddenly. "In my audit, I found transfers to offshore accounts in Singapore 2 days before your mother's death. The authorization came through unusual channels. I flagged it, but couldn't trace the origin." For the first time since she'd known him, Keith seemed genuinely astonished. "You found what my investigators have been searching for over a year. I'm not just the mother of your child or a convenient cover," Kira said firmly. "I'm a financial analyst who can follow money trails better than most. I want in, not as your wife of convenience, but as your partner." The security team exchanged glances as Keith and Kira stared at each other, a new understanding forming between them. "We leave in 5 minutes, Keith finally said. "Pack only essentials." As Kira quickly gathered their belongings and her research files, she felt a strange sense of liberation. The deception that had defined their relationship was stripped away, leaving something raw but potentially stronger in its place. Watching Keith issue directions to his team with natural authority, she saw him fully for the first time. Not the beggar she'd married, nor the billionaire heir, but a man fighting for justice while protecting those he loved. The corporate world believes wealth equals power, but sometimes invisibility is the greatest advantage. Now, as Keith shed his beggar disguise to reclaim his position as coffee heir, Reuben would discover too late that the enemy he thought he'd eliminated had been watching his every move from the shadows, collecting evidence, building alliances, and patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Dawn broke over the city as Keith's security team transformed their modest apartment into a command center. Multiple screens displayed security feeds, corporate documents, and surveillance photos of Reuben's recent meetings. Kira watched, with a mixture of awe and trepidation, as Keith smoothly directed his team, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone born to lead. Gone was any trace of the humble man she had married. In his place stood the formidable heir to the coffee empire, preparing for war. "The shareholder meeting is in 48 hours, Keith addressed the room, his finger tracing the timeline projected on the wall. "We have one chance to present our case before Reuben can mobilize his supporters. If we fail, he'll have me committed or worse." The unspoken threat hung in the air. Reuben had already proven his willingness to kill once. Their strategy session was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, drawing weapons, as one of them checked the monitor. "It's Gregory Prescott," the agent announced, looking to Keith for instructions. Keith nodded. "Let him in. This was bound to happen sooner or later." Greg strutted in with the smug confidence of someone holding a winning hand. His expensive suit and slick haircut contrasted sharply with the modest apartment setting. His eyes widened briefly at the sight of the command center before his face settled into a calculating smile. "Well, well, well," Greg drawled, eyeing Keith with newfound appreciation. "The beggar prince returns. I wondered how long you'd keep up your little charade." He pulled out his phone, displaying photos of Keith entering the Coffee Corporation headquarters through his private entrance. "I imagine the board would be fascinated to learn that their missing heir has been playing homeless while plotting against his own family." Keith remained still, his face impassive. "What do you want, Greg?" "Simple." Greg's eyes gleamed with malice. $10 million transferred to my offshore account by morning, and I'll forget I ever saw these. Otherwise, Ruben gets these pictures before the shareholder meeting. He glanced at Kira with contempt. "Your wife was always terrible at negotiating. Let's see if you're any better." Before Keith could respond, Kira stepped forward. "You really haven't changed, have you, Greg? Still, the same predictable opportunist." She moved to the computer and pulled up a file. "While you were busy taking those photos, did you forget about these?" The screen displayed surveillance footage of Greg entering restricted areas of the Coffee Corporation, copying confidential documents, and meeting with Ruben in secluded locations. "How did you—" Greg's confidence faltered. "You taught me one valuable lesson during our relationship," Kira continued, her voice steady. "Always keep evidence of betrayal. I've been documenting your corporate espionage for months. The legal department already has copies." She smiled coldly. "So, by all means, run to Ruben with your photos. Just remember that blackmail carries a minimum 5-year sentence in this state." Greg's face drained of color as he realized his leverage had evaporated. Without another word, he turned and fled the apartment. Keith looked at Kira with newfound respect. "That was impressive." "I learned from the best," she replied. "Now let's get back to work. We have a company to reclaim." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of strategy sessions, evidence compilation, and preparation. While Keith's team focused on security protocols for his public reappearance, Kira meticulously organized the financial evidence into an airtight presentation. The offshore accounts, the questionable transactions surrounding Eliza Coffey's death, and the systematic embezzlement scheme all pointed to Ruben's guilt. On the morning of the shareholder meeting, Keith emerged from the bedroom in a perfectly tailored suit that emphasized his commanding presence. For the first time, Kira fully comprehended the magnitude of who her husband truly was, a man born into power who had willingly stepped away from it to pursue justice. "Are you ready?" Keith asked, offering his hand. "As ready as I'll ever be," Kira replied, taking it. The Coffee Corporation headquarters seethed with tension as word spread of Keith's return. Photographers swarmed the entrance, desperate for a glimpse of the prodigal heir. Inside, shareholders and board members whispered frantically, speculating about the sudden reappearance and what it meant for their investments. Ruben's face betrayed a flicker of shock when Keith strode into the boardroom, but he quickly recovered, rising to embrace his cousin with artificial warmth. "Keith, what a miracle to have you back with us. We've all been so concerned about your mental state." Keith smoothly disengaged from Ruben's embrace. "I appreciate your concern, cousin. I'm sure you'll be relieved to know my mental faculties are intact enough to notice when someone has been systematically stealing from my family's company and murdering those who stand in their way." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Ruben's smile hardened. "I see your time away hasn't cured your paranoid delusions. Perhaps we should postpone this meeting until medical professionals can assess. The only assessment needed today is of these financial records," Keith interrupted, nodding to Kira, who distributed comprehensive dossiers to each board member. "My colleague has uncovered irrefutable evidence of embezzlement on a massive scale. Funds diverted to shell companies owned by Ruben Coffey, synchronized perfectly with my mother's suspicious death." Greg burst into the room, his tie askew and desperation in his eyes. "He's lying. This woman fabricated the evidence. She's nothing but a gold digger who married Keith for his money." Kira remained calm as she walked to the projection screen. The evidence speaks for itself. Security footage showing Mr. Prescott accessing confidential information, transfer records authenticated by 3 independent forensic accountants. And most damning of all, she nodded to Keith, who removed a leather-bound journal from his briefcase. "My mother's personal journal," Keith said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "in which she documents Ruben's threats in the weeks before her death, her discovery of his embezzlement, and her fear for her life." He placed the journal on the table. The final entry was written the night before she died, stating her intention to expose Ruben at the next day's board meeting, a meeting she never lived to attend. Ruben lunged toward the journal, but security personnel moved swiftly to restrain him. "This is absurd. You can't possibly believe." The board chairman raised his hand for silence. "We've heard enough. Security, please escort Mr. Ruben Coffey from the premises and notify the authorities. Mr. Prescott, you will remain here until police arrive." He turned to Keith. "The board will need to verify these allegations thoroughly, but preliminarily, I believe I speak for everyone when I say we're relieved to have the rightful Coffey heir back at the helm." As police officers led Ruben and Greg away, the remaining hours of the meeting focused on stabilizing the company and addressing shareholder concerns. Keith handled each question with the assurance of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years, winning over even the most skeptical board members with his depth of knowledge and strategic vision. When the meeting finally adjourned, Keith approached the chairman with Kira at his side. "There's one more matter I'd like to address," he said. "I'd like to propose Kira Coffey as co-director of operations, effective immediately." The chairman raised an eyebrow. "That's an unconventional request. May I ask why?" Keith smiled. "Because without her financial expertise and courage, we wouldn't be having this conversation. She discovered the discrepancies no one else noticed, connected dots that had eluded our entire financial department, and did so while under direct threat from the people responsible. The Coffey Corporation needs that kind of integrity and intelligence at its highest levels." The applause of the boardroom faded into uncomfortable silence as Keith's limousine carried them toward his family mansion. Kira stared out the window, watching the landscape transform from city streets to manicured estates, each property growing more impressive than the last. The 20-acre Coffey estate appeared on the horizon, its stone facade catching the afternoon light. Keith's hand found hers across the leather seat. "I thought you might want to see your actual home," he said quietly, the weight of his years of deception suddenly visible in the tightness around his eyes. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer we go our separate ways now that the danger has passed." Kira's breath caught in her throat. The practical reasons for their marriage had evaporated the moment Keith reclaimed his position, and Ruben was escorted from the building in handcuffs. What remained between them now existed in a nebulous space, not quite love, yet something deeper than convenience. "The paparazzi are already camped at the gates," Keith continued, nodding toward the cluster of telephoto lenses, visible through the tinted windows. "By morning, they'll have invented a dozen stories about us. Most will paint you as a calculating gold digger who somehow trapped the elusive Coffey heir." The mansion loomed larger as they approached, its grandeur making Kira acutely aware of the gulf between their worlds. She thought of their cramped apartment, the sofa where Keith had slept, the tiny kitchen where he'd guided her hand while adding herbs to sauce. Those moments felt authentic in a way this opulent setting never could. "Is this really where you grew up?" she asked, searching for traces of the man she knew in this sprawling monument to wealth. Keith's expression softened. "This house was never home. It was a museum where I learned to perform the role expected of a Coffey. The only rooms that felt real were the kitchen, where our cook let me help with pastries, and the attic, where I could escape and simply be a boy instead of an heir." The car stopped at the entrance, where a line of staff stood waiting to greet them. Kira clutched her daughter closer, suddenly aware of how unprepared she was for this world. The baby gurgled happily, completely unaware that her life had just transformed into one of extraordinary privilege. "Ms. Coffey, welcome home," the butler said with practiced warmth as he opened the car door. The title felt wrong, like clothing tailored for someone else. Within 24 hours, Kira went from relative anonymity to front-page news. Breakfast was served with a side of tabloids, their headlines screaming speculation about the mystery woman who captured Keith Coffey. One particularly vicious article questioned whether she had engineered their meeting, suggesting she had researched his habits and positioned herself to appear helpless. Keith tossed the papers aside. "I can have our legal team shut this down and confirm I can't handle scrutiny?" Kira challenged, finding her voice. "I survived Greg's attempts to destroy me. I can survive gossip." Days blurred into weeks as Kira navigated her new reality. At dinner parties, conversation would falter when she approached, resuming with forced brightness. Women who had attended school with Keith studied her with thinly veiled curiosity, their questions probing for weaknesses in her background. Men who managed Coffee Corporation subsidiaries watched her with calculation, trying to determine if she wielded influence over their newly returned boss. "Do you think you'll stay?" a woman in diamonds asked one evening, swirling champagne in a crystal flute. Marriage can be such a complicated business arrangement, especially when begun under unusual circumstances. The question hung in the air, echoing conversations Kira had overheard throughout the house. Staff whispered about temporary arrangements and generous settlements. Even Keith's personal assistant had accidentally left divorce attorney recommendations on his desk. That night, Keith found Kira in the nursery, watching their daughter sleep. The moonlight cast soft shadows across the hand-carved crib that had once appeared in their modest apartment as an anonymous gift. "We need to discuss our situation," Keith said, closing the door softly behind him. "The practical reasons for our marriage no longer exist. You have legal and financial security now, regardless of what happens between us." Kira turned to face him. "Are you suggesting a divorce?" "I'm suggesting options," he corrected. "My deception brought you into this world. You shouldn't feel trapped by a marriage that served its purpose. Is that what our marriage was to you? A strategy with an expiration date?" Keith moved closer, his expression unguarded in a way she rarely saw outside their old apartment. "At first, yes, it was tactical, a way to protect you while maintaining my cover. But something changed during those months. When you brought home that ridiculous cake to celebrate our 3-month anniversary, insisting we needed to mark the occasion, despite it being a sham marriage. You ate 3 slices, Kira remembered, smiling despite herself. "I realized I'd stopped acting," Keith admitted. "The man who sat at your kitchen table wasn't a performance anymore." Before Kira could respond, the baby monitor crackled with sudden distressed cries. They both rushed to the crib, where their daughter's face had flushed an alarming shade of red, her tiny body radiating heat. "She's burning up," Kira gasped, reaching for the thermometer on the changing table. What followed was a night that stripped away all pretense between them. They worked in perfect tandem, Keith calling his pediatrician while Kira prepared a cool bath, both taking turns walking the floor with their whimpering child. By dawn, when the fever finally broke, they found themselves exhausted on the nursery floor, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. "I've sat through billion-dollar negotiations with less fear than I felt tonight," Keith whispered, gently stroking his daughter's cheek. "None of it matters compared to this." Kira studied his face, the carefully maintained facade of the coffee heir completely absent. "This is real," she realized aloud. "Everything else can be pretense, but not how we feel about her." "Not just her," Keith said, meeting Kira's gaze. "I've been living behind masks for so long, I almost forgot what truth feels like. But with you, even when you thought I was homeless, even when you discovered I'd lied, you saw me clearly." 3 days later, after the baby had fully recovered, Keith arranged a private dinner on the terrace, overlooking the estate gardens. Kira arrived to find the table set with the mismatched plates from their apartment, a bottle of inexpensive wine they'd shared after particularly difficult days, and the chipped mugs they'd used for morning coffee. "What's all this?" she asked, touching the familiar items with surprise. "Remembrance," Keith answered, "of who we were when nothing else mattered but getting through each day together." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside were divorce papers, already signed on his side, and documentation of a trust fund established in her name, independent of their marital status. "Your freedom," he explained. "Whatever you choose, you'll never have to worry about security again." Kira studied the papers, then looked up at the man across from her. This complex person, who had been both beggar and billionaire, stranger and husband, deceiver and protector. "I have a counteroffer," she said, finally, taking the papers and deliberately tearing them in half. "We start again, not as a homeless man and a desperate mother, not as an heir and a gold digger, just as Keith and Kira, who found something unexpected in the middle of a charade." The weight of uncertainty lifted from Keith's shoulders as he reached across the table for her hand. "Is that even possible after everything?" "We already did the impossible part," Kira replied. "We built something real on a foundation of deception. Imagine what we could build on truth." Truth became their foundation, but some secrets refused to stay buried forever. As Kira and Keith embraced their authentic relationship, dark forces were already mobilizing against them, orchestrating a plan so personal it would target not just their reputation, but the very child who had brought them together. From his luxury prison cell awaiting trial, Reuben Coffey made his first move. Though stripped of his official power, his network remained intact. Anonymous opinion pieces began appearing in financial publications, questioning Kira's sudden rise from obscurity. The narrative was carefully crafted. A calculating woman who had seduced the vulnerable Coffey heir during his period of mental instability. Photos of Kira entering the courthouse for their original marriage ceremony were plastered across tabloids with headlines like "The Billion-Dollar Trap." Keith discovered the source when his private investigator traced payments to several journalists through a shell corporation still controlled by Reuben's associates. "He's more desperate than I thought," Keith said, tossing the file onto their kitchen counter. "These character assassinations won't hold up in court, but public opinion is another matter entirely." Kira maintained her composure publicly, but privately, she felt the weight of scrutiny crushing against her shoulders. The Coffey family's annual charity fundraiser became an exercise in endurance, as whispers followed her through crowds of elite socialites. Keith's aunt cornered him near the champagne fountain, her diamonds glittering like ice as she hissed, "That woman is using you, Keith. The board is concerned about your judgment since your episode." The most devastating blow came on a Tuesday morning when Kira was served papers at the Coffey Corporation headquarters. Greg was petitioning for paternity, testing, and full custody rights, claiming he had been cruelly separated from his biological child. The legal documents contained intimate details of their past relationship that only Greg could have known, deliberately twisted to paint Kira as unstable and manipulative. "He knows he's not the father," Kira whispered, her hands trembling as Keith read through the court filing. "The DNA test already proved it's your child." Keith's expression darkened. "This isn't about being a father. It's about control and revenge. Notice how the petition mentions my history of mental instability, the exact phrase from those planted news stories. Greg and Reuben are working together." Their suspicions were confirmed when the Coffey Corporation's internal auditor flagged concerning irregularities in 3 projects Kira had supervised. The timing couldn't have been more transparent, the accusation landing precisely as the board was considering her permanent appointment as co-director. A forensic accounting team discovered fabricated transactions mirroring Kira's digital signature. Created during hours she was demonstrably elsewhere. The pressure mounted when Keith's brother Timothy requested an emergency family meeting without Kira present. "This isn't personal," Timothy insisted over the phone, "but the Coffey name has endured enough scandal. We need to discuss options for protecting our legacy." In their bedroom that night, Kira finally broke. "Maybe they're right," she said, staring at the ceiling. "Your life would be simpler without me. Your family would accept you back without reservation." Keith sat beside her, taking her hand. "I spent 2 years living in shadows, watching my family's company be pillaged by a murderer. I won't spend another day pretending to be someone I'm not, or sacrificing what matters to appease people who care more about appearances than truth." Rather than retreat, Keith launched a counteroffensive. He assembled a team of cybersecurity experts who traced the digital trail of the fabricated financial transactions. The evidence pointed to a sophisticated operation using access codes that only senior executives possessed. Meanwhile, his private investigators uncovered something far more damning: encrypted communications between Greg and Reuben dating back 3 years. The revelation came at midnight when Keith's security chief called with news they hadn't anticipated. "Sir, we've accessed Greg's cloud storage through a warrant tied to the embezzlement investigation. There's a contract with Reuben Coffey's signature. It predates Greg's relationship with Ms. Kira by approximately 1 month. The document outlined a strategic agreement. Greg would pursue a relationship with a promising financial analyst at the firm, Kira, to gain proximity to her work and insights. In exchange, Reuben would ensure Greg's advancement within the company's structure. The contract even specified a bonus payment when Greg successfully accessed Kira's preliminary findings on certain investment accounts. Keith stared at the document in disbelief. She was targeted from the beginning. A deeper investigation revealed the truth in its entirety. Kira had never been randomly selected for her position. Her exceptional performance during university and early career had caught Reuben's attention years earlier. Internal memos showed he had monitored her progress, recognizing her particular talent for identifying financial anomalies, the very skill that might eventually expose his embezzlement and the financial maneuvers preceding Eliza Coffey's murder. When Kira began outperforming expectations, Reuben deployed Greg as his agent, initiating a relationship that would provide access to her work while simultaneously undermining her confidence and professional standing. The 3-year relationship had been a calculated business arrangement from its inception. The final confrontation occurred in the Coffey Corporation boardroom. Keith arranged for both Reuben's attorney and Greg to be present for what was ostensibly a settlement discussion. Instead, they found themselves facing a comprehensive presentation of evidence, communications, contracts, financial trails, and testimony from cooperating witnesses who had facilitated their scheme. "You didn't just target a corporation," Keith said, his voice steady as he addressed the two men. "You targeted a person. You manipulated years of Kira's life, as if she were nothing more than collateral damage in your scheme." Greg's attorney attempted to interrupt, but Keith continued. "The full evidence package has already been delivered to the district attorney. The charges now include conspiracy, fraud, corporate espionage, witness tampering, and malicious prosecution." Reuben's attorney blanched when Keith revealed that 3 of Reuben's co-conspirators had accepted immunity deals in exchange for their testimony about both the embezzlement scheme and Eliza Coffey's murder. Greg, realizing he had been abandoned by his powerful ally, attempted to negotiate his own deal, offering to testify against Reuben in exchange for leniency. The Coffey family patriarch, Keith's grandfather Harrison, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "My daughter was murdered because she discovered what you were doing, Reuben. And you," he turned to Greg, "you manipulated an innocent woman's life for money and advancement. There will be no deals made in this room today." The winter sun cast golden light through the windows of the Coffey estate as Kira watched her daughter take unsteady steps across the manicured lawn. Keith knelt nearby, arms outstretched, his CEO persona nowhere in sight. Life had come full circle in ways neither could have predicted. What began as a desperate arrangement had transformed into something neither had dared hope for. Genuine partnership forged in adversity's fires. Their story wasn't just about finding love in unexpected places, but about finding truth beneath carefully constructed facades. They had learned that genuine strength comes not from wealth or position, but from the courage to be vulnerable with another soul.